not too long after Christmas break. We're actually going to be done, and we're going to make it through the American history. So we're going to spend a lot of the time before your EOC, before May, reviewing. And we're going to go back over some of these things in more detail. I'm going to do a lot of checks for understanding to see where you're at, to make sure that you've mastered the content and all that good stuff. So just so you know. Hey, folks, it is November the 6th, and this Friday and next Friday are B days, so make sure you join us for that. And we are going to finish up our unit on the Great Depression. It's going to be a pretty short lesson today. So next week, next Friday, we're going to have a vocabulary quiz. And remember, your vocabulary is found on the beginning of each unit. It's usually about 5 terms. So make sure you know those. And I'll have something for you. This will reach back to older units, though. Whereas the tests are not cumulative. They're only over the units I tell you it's about. The quizzes are. The quizzes will reach all the way back to the beginning of the year. So the old terms and the new terms will be combined. So expect to see them get a little larger here and there as we move on. All right. Let me pull this up for you. And yeah, next week we get to start World War II. Usually people are a little more interested in that one. So
World War II.
Yeah, I hope you have a little fun with that.
Well, I will.
Robert will. Robert will have enough fun for all of us.
Yeah.
It's going to get straight up sardonic. It's reloading. Oh, poor old computer. Let me catch up. It'll probably bring us back to where we're at. There it is. Yeah, so we ended off talking about like those big conservation armies, putting young men to work for some cash for the federal government, doing public works projects. And then they would have to send some of the money back home, learn job skills, and help improve what we could like to call the infrastructure of the nation, like roads and things like that. Now, working like the jobs, like we call like blue collar jobs where you work with your hands, weren't the only ones. During this time period, the federal government is also going to help employ artists, historians, teachers, and white collar people, because they didn't want to see like what you call a brain drain. They didn't want to see that people who did those kind of skills essentially leave the country or give up. So, under the New Deal programs, the federal government gave work to artists, engineers, even historians. During this period, historians are going to be hired by the federal government to do things like interview Native Americans, because there were still some Native Americans, and there still are some today, who still spoke languages that are now extinct, who had cultural myths and histories, that oral histories, and they wanted to get recordings of these before these people passed on, and some of them did. Also, this was the 1930s, and so the last people who were still alive from the U.S. Civil War, or people who actually lived as slaves in the South, they were getting very old and they were passing on. So historians were interviewing these people, and in some cases recording their conversations with them, so we could have historical records on what they went through in their lives before it all vanished. So this was a good time period for that. To place constraints on some of the causes of the Great Depression, the administration saw to opening the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC. If you ever see a bank commercial, they always say, we're a member of the FDIC, or you look at the fine print. That's because it's a law that has to do with banking regulation that's still around today. They also passed the Security Exchange Commission, the SEC. The FDIC provided insurance for all banks that joined it. In half a year of this law's passing, 97% of the nation's banks had joined it. And so this is one of those reforms to show where if a bank goes under or if it faces bankruptcy, there's protections for it and protections for the people who have their money in the bank. So that is important. You don't want to lose all of your earnings. The SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, was in charge of licensing stock exchanges and set up margin rates and created other regulations regarding the stock market. So this was supposed to be a buffer and in order to prevent stock market crashes. Um, like one of the things, and this has happened, I think a couple of years ago, where they could freeze stock market trading to make sure there's not like a big panic sell-off, to try to make sure that people aren't being like losing everything at once, to try to take some of the risk out of the stock market. As 1933 waned, many in the nation felt the government was growing too big, exerting too much control over business and sliding towards socialism. At this point, most Republicans no longer supported the New Deal. So remember, at first, FDR was voted into office. People wanted a lot of help. They wanted reform. However, once a lot of these laws started rolling in, a lot of people started getting buyer's remorse. And whenever one party's in charge, the other party tends to become what we call an opposition party. Eventually, it starts to go against the party that's in power. Doing so is kind of a survival mechanism. If you go along with the opposition too long, then there's no reason to vote for you. So it kind of makes sense from a practical standpoint. But it does away with unity at the same time. So there's also some negativity to it. You ready to move on? Hey, all right. All right, so here you see is people holding up signs, talking about maternity and old age insurance, equal rights for Black people, unemployment insurance. So this is going to be a time where you're going to start seeing more protections for people, especially, remember I told you there was no such thing as retirement for a lot of folks. And so when the banks went away and the jobs went away, a lot of people were left with nothing. Let's see how they fix some of that, or at least attempt to. One of the longest lasting and perhaps most momentous reforms laid out by the Roosevelt administration was the Social Security Act of 1935, and we still have that today. This bill completely changed the government's role in society. The law established a pension plan for retired people age 65 or older. So a pension, it's retirement money, right? You get it once a month. And but in this case, instead from a job you used to work from or for, it's from the federal government. The more someone paid into the system, the more they would receive in monthly installments. It also provided federal aid to families with dependent children, the disabled, and funded state-run unemployment systems. So I think at the time of its passage, it was something like 10 or 15 working people paid into the system for every retiree. The life expectancy for an average American was much lower back then. So usually the idea was someone would retire at the age of 65 and they might live 5 to 10 years, but then they would no longer collect on Social Security because they passed. Nowadays, people have a much higher life expectancy, so they're on Social Security much longer, and a lot less people pay into it. I think it's something like 2.5 workers pay for every person collecting Social Security. So they definitely need to do something about the system, or it won't last too much longer. But it's been around for a long time. It's a pretty big political issue. Usually whenever you have like presidential races and stuff like that, Social Security comes up over who will manage it the best. And yeah, it's also there, it helps out with like orphans or people who are so disabled they can't work, that they'll also collect Social Security. By 1935, Roosevelt won re-election and saw this as an affirmation of the public support for the New Deal. However, in his second term, he would see that he lost a lot of public support. So enough people still liked him where they vote for him for president. However, they didn't quite want him to push as many reforms as he wanted in the first place. But yeah, just know Social Security is an important one. So when you, some of you already have jobs where you're paying taxes, and if you look at your paycheck, you'll see that on this pay stub, they take out money for Social Security. So if you're working and it's like not under the table, they're taking out Social Security for you already. Let's go to the last one. And this is something that's been brought up here recently. So do we want a ventriloquist act in the Supreme Court? And it says packed court. And you see it's all sitting on his knee and they're all saying, yes, yes, we all vote yes. So.
True, but
Huh?
who's the president sitting?
Yeah, so that's the president. And what this is this is one thing he's going to be criticized by even his own party. He's going to get mad that a lot of his reforms are going to get shot down by the Supreme Court. So he's going to make an attempt to, the president has the right to appoint justices in the Supreme Court. And so the ones he liked, or the ones that were there didn't like his reforms. So he decided he would try to just fill it up with more judges who liked him. But the thing is, that was seen as something that would like totally disrupt the American system. And so they didn't do it. All right. So Roosevelt had many of his programs defeated by the Supreme Court. In order to stop this from happening again, FDR sought to change the makeup of the court by adding a new justice for everyone over the age of 70 and who had served more than 10 years. This threatened the very basis of checks and balances so much that many Democrats sided against him. So even his own party was turning against him. They're like, you can't have this much power. It would make you like a king. Due to retirements of Supreme Court justices, he would be allowed to nominate a total of 9 judges during his presidency anyways. Pretty sure that's a record. Roosevelt also faced a major recession following 1935 after he pulled back some of the programs in federal spending. By 1938, he had to reinstate them in order to avoid a total economic collapse. So what this means is that the programs he had in place were super expensive, paying hundreds of thousands of people to work, helping to pay for crops that weren't being grown, having large bureaucracies manage factories and stuff like that. That's super expensive. The nation was going into debt trying to prop it up. And so he tried to pull back some of these programs in order to balance the budget a bit. But when he did so, the economy almost went to a second Great Depression. So he had to reinstate them. What that means is his programs were keeping things going, but they didn't heal the wound. And so people were like, what are we going to do? How are we going to get out of this? Well, the answer is going to be World War II. It's going to fix the economy, for better or worse. And that's the last one from the Great Depression slide. So when we come back next week and Tuesday, we'll go over our vocabulary terms for World War II, we'll do the overview, and we'll start getting into the build-up to World War II. It's not something that just happens. Everything has a cause before there's an effect, especially human things like, wars. So we know there's reasons why it happened. We will talk about that. So, folks, that is a super short one this week. I will post the World War II notes for you in a bit. So if you want to read up on that, but we'll talk about them when we come back on Tuesday. See you later.